I never cared much for birthdays. No parties, no balloons, no surprise visits. Just a quiet corner at Fort Carson, a black coffee, and the comfort of knowing no one expected a big speech. I was 65. Retirement was 6 weeks away. After 35 years in the military, I thought I'd earned the right to fade out quietly. That was the plan. But plans don't matter when your name is stamped on something you didn't ask for. It arrived around 11:30 a.m. I was reviewing logistics protocols for a weapons inventory audit when Private Lanning entered the room. He looked confused, maybe a little nervous. "Captain McLean, there's a delivery for you. Civilian post, not base processed." He placed a package on my desk. Brown cardboard, medium size. Too neat. No handwriting, no ribbons. Just a printed label that read, "To Captain Thomas McLean. From Emily McLean, my daughter. The one who stopped talking to me 2 years ago." The name hit me harder than I expected. I hadn't seen it in print in a long time. Emily hadn't called for Father's Day, hadn't written during my last overseas deployment, hadn't even acknowledged my promotion last year. And now this. A package. On my birthday. I stared at it for a long moment. Then I reached for my pocket knife. Before the blade touched the tape, someone behind me spoke. "Don't open that." I turned. It was Captain Morales, my CO. A stern, meticulous man with a calm that could freeze a room. He was standing in the doorway, arms crossed, eyes fixed on the package like it had insulted him. "Excuse me," I asked. "That's not a gift," he said. "Put that down, now." The tone wasn't casual. It was a field voice, clipped and cold. The kind you use when you find a tripwire. I frowned. "It's from my daughter." I said, half defensive, half unsure. Morales stepped into the room, leaned over, and pointed to a tiny mark on the bottom corner of the shipping label. A series of letters printed in gray, ALR Mills 115. "That's not postal code," he said. "That's a logistics routing identifier. Military grade. We've seen those on flagged shipments before." My stomach tightened. I looked again. He was right. The label looked clean, professional, almost too clean. The tape was diagonally sealed, same as the ones we used for sensitive gear transfer. I ran my fingers along the edge. It felt too deliberate. "It's just Emily," I said, less sure now. Morales didn't move. "Captain, with all due respect, how long since you spoke to her?" I hesitated. 2 years. Maybe more. "And she sent you something today out of the blue?" "It's my birthday," I muttered. "Exactly," he said. "Which makes this the perfect cover." I didn't want to hear that. I didn't want to believe my own daughter would use my name for something dangerous. But Morales wasn't guessing. His instincts were tuned to threats. "Sir," he added quietly, "I need you to walk that down to internal security. Now." I didn't argue. I picked up the package and carried it across the corridor like it might explode. On the way, my mind raced. Emily. Last time we spoke, she was furious. Said I never supported her dreams, that I treated her like a problem instead of a person. She had started some kind of art startup, handmade models or something, and wanted to use my name for a business license. I told her no. Not without understanding the full scope. She said I didn't trust her. I said trust was earned. That was the last real conversation. Now a box with her name on it had shown up at a secure military base, wrapped like a gift, but smelling like a trap. Internal security received it without ceremony. Sergeant Brooks gave me a look I couldn't read and logged it into evidence. "We'll run a scan and notify command," he said. "Do not discuss this with anyone else until we clear the contents." I nodded. As I turned to leave, I caught my reflection in the glass door. My uniform looked sharp, my posture straight. But something behind my eyes looked tired. Not because I felt old, because something was wrong. Deeply wrong. I walked out into the Colorado sunlight and called my ex-wife. "Did Emily send me something?" I asked. Her pause was too long. "It's just a birthday box, Thomas," she said. "She wanted to surprise you." "Did you see what was in it?" "Not exactly. She just said it was something small." "A tribute." "A tribute," I repeated. "That's what she called it, yes." I hung up. I didn't need more answers from her. The word tribute echoed like a riddle. Why would my daughter, who hadn't spoken to me in years, send a tribute? Why today? Why now? Something about it felt rehearsed, too carefully timed, and I knew deep down I hadn't received a gift. I had received a warning. Thomas McLean didn't become a soldier by accident. Born into a long line of service members, he enlisted at 18 and never looked back. Over 3 decades later, he had served in 6 countries, seen 2 wars, trained hundreds, and lost more than he ever spoke of. His uniform wasn't just fabric. It was identity, stability, proof of existence. But for all the structure the Army gave him, nothing had prepared him for the chaos of fatherhood, especially not single fatherhood. Emily was born when he was 29. Her mother, Mary Ann, left when Emily was 9, said she couldn't handle the military life, said Thomas was too rigid, too controlling, too cold. Emily stayed with him, but the cracks began early. He tried harder than he ever admitted. He made her breakfast before early drills. He coached her through homework at base cafeterias. He even learned how to braid hair poorly, but with effort. But he never learned how to say the soft things. "I love you" came out stiff like commands. "I'm proud of you" was translated into "you can do better." Still for years, Emily looked up to him, until she didn't. She went to college on a partial scholarship and came back changed. Words like patriarchy, capitalist systems, and emotional labor spilled from her mouth like accusations. She joined a local art collective, started painting, sculpting, trying to find herself in shapes and colors Thomas didn't understand. He visited once. The apartment was a mess of canvases, lavender incense, and half-finished installations. She called it creative flow. He called it chaos. Then came the startup idea. Emily wanted to start a functional art company. Figurines with embedded messages, spiritual tokens, things he couldn't categorize. But what she needed wasn't advice. It was his name, specifically his military background. "You've got integrity, Dad. People trust you. If I list you as an advisor or founding member, it'll give the brand weight," she said over a tense brunch. He pushed his plate aside. "You want me to lend my credibility to something I don't understand?" "It's just a formality," she insisted. "You won't have to do anything. Just sign the damn form." He didn't. Not because he didn't care, but because he cared too much. "You're asking me to gamble my record, my reputation?" "That's not a small thing," he replied. She stood up, tears already forming. "You don't believe in me. You never have." And that was it. She stopped replying to texts, stopped returning calls. On his 64th birthday, there was no message, no email on Christmas. She didn't show up for his commendation ceremony last spring. He told himself she was busy. He told himself she'd come around. But somewhere in the silence, he'd started believing something worse. That she didn't want him. That she'd written him off the same way her mother had. He didn't talk about it at work. Not even with Morales, who had known him for years. He just buried himself in reports and drills, grateful that structure didn't ask for emotional honesty. Yet the pain was there. A silent companion. The ache of being deliberately forgotten by someone you once carried through night terrors and fevers. He kept one photo of Emily in his desk drawer. She was 11, missing a front tooth, holding a trophy for a spelling bee she never wanted to enter. He had insisted she try just once to push herself. She won. They had ice cream that night. That was the last time he remembered her holding his hand voluntarily. He opened that drawer sometimes not to look at the photo, but just to know it was there. Proof that once she smiled because he was in the room. When Morales flagged the box, Thomas didn't want to believe it. Not because he doubted his commander's instincts, but because believing it meant accepting that Emily hadn't just distanced herself. She had weaponized their connection. He walked back from internal security with 1,000 thoughts pressing into the edges of his skull. What if she'd forged something? What if this was her way of getting back at him, not through rage, but through paperwork. Or worse, what if she hadn't meant harm but had gotten involved with people who did? He couldn't tell which possibility was worse, that his daughter was careless or calculating. That night he sat in his quarters, lights low, uniform still on. He didn't drink, didn't turn on music, just stared at the package receipt copy he had been given by Brooks. It listed McLean Logistics LLC as the sender. That name didn't exist in any registry he had authorized. Yet it was tied to his address from 7 years ago, a location Emily had once used to register for an art fair. He remembered the conversation vividly. Just a P.O. box, Dad. I need somewhere stable for them to mail stuff. Your place is more official. He had shrugged, not thinking twice. It had seemed harmless. That was the thing with Emily. She didn't steal. She borrowed, slipped, bypassed, always with a smile, always with a reason. Now that habit had found its way into a base investigation. He thought about calling her just once to ask what the hell she was thinking. But what would he say? Hi, Emily. Just wondering why you're using my name to move questionable packages through a federal facility. No, this needed to be handled right, by protocol, not emotion. Because Thomas McLean wasn't just a father. He was a soldier. And if his own blood had crossed a line, he'd stand on the right side of it, even if it meant standing alone. The next morning, internal security called Thomas at 0720. The package had triggered a secondary alert during scanning. Nothing dangerous inside, no explosives, no electronics, but the barcode on the label matched a batch of shipments previously flagged by the Department of Defense. Sergeant Brooks kept his tone neutral, but Thomas could hear the shift in gravity. Sir, we're going to need a little more context from you. The package is linked to a third-party vendor listed in our 2023 audit, Northridge Supplies. They were investigated for mislabeling surplus parts as civilian grade. Thomas blinked. I've never heard of them. Well, they've heard of you, Brooks said, then added, your name appears in their client archive. Twice. That wasn't possible. Thomas had never placed a single private order for military hardware. The last time he ordered anything outside the base was a pair of orthopedic boots through his VA account. He asked Brooks to forward the documents. 10 minutes later, he had the files on his screen. The invoices were detailed uncomfortably so. Both orders were dated 6 months apart. Both listed T. McLean as the purchasing agent for McLean Logistics LLC. The email tied to the orders was unfamiliar but disturbingly close to his own, Thomas McLean Consulting at gmail.com, not his, but close enough to fool anyone not paying attention. The address matched his old apartment in Fort Collins, a place Emily had stayed in during a rough patch after college. She'd used it to register a community arts grant. That memory now soured. Thomas sat very still, one hand on the mouse, the other gripping the desk. His eyes scanned every line of the invoice. Each one pulled tighter against his chest. It wasn't just the use of his name. The purchases themselves were suspicious. Figurines, yes, but described as modular display units with embedded circuitry. Decorative terms hiding technical ones. Code. The package delivered to the base was listed as part of Series 7 inventory, a term used in surplus transfer forms. Someone had cleaned the paper trail, given it a fresh coat of paint, and mailed it under his name to a military base. The implications were catastrophic. If he hadn't flagged the package, hadn't handed it over immediately, the military could have construed this as smuggling. Worse, as internal misconduct. He had been around long enough to know what paperwork looked like when someone was trying to protect themselves while pinning blame elsewhere. And this reeked of it. He opened a new browser window and typed in McLean Logistics LLC. The results were sparse but present. A business registration in Georgia, filed 10 months ago. Owner Emily McLean, advisor Thomas McLean. Email contact thomasmclean.consulting@gmail.com. He stared at the screen, throat dry. It wasn't just forgery. It was construction. A full business identity created using his name, his military status, and he suspected documents she once begged him for under the guise of filing taxes or applying for a lease. He checked his email archives, found one from 2 years ago. "Hey Dad, can you send me a copy of your DD-214? I'm trying to help my friend apply for a VA workshop. They just need an example." He had sent it. Trusting. That trust was now bleeding onto his uniform. He printed the business filing, grabbed the invoices, and walked straight to Morales' office. The commander didn't say a word, as Thomas laid the papers down. When he finished, Morales exhaled slowly. "This isn't just suspicious anymore," he said. "It's criminal." Thomas nodded. "I want to make it clear I never authorized this. Not a word, not a document, not a single goddamn letter of endorsement." Morales looked at him, eyes unreadable. "Do you have a lawyer?" "Not yet." "Get one, and talk to Base Legal. Immediately." By noon, Thomas was sitting in the office of Lieutenant Sharp, a young but seasoned military attorney. She listened without interrupting her pen, moving silently across a legal pad. When he finished, she leaned back. "We've had cases like this. Not often, but they happen. Family using service members' credentials for gain. Most don't rise to this level. But this," she tapped the paper, "this is federal. Identity fraud. Possibly conspiracy to commit military contractor fraud. And you're on paper as complicit, unless we can prove otherwise." "What do I need to do?" Thomas asked. "Everything. Pull every email, every message, every time she used your name or address without consent. The more distance you can show, the stronger your defense. And the package still being held. They're opening it under controlled conditions this afternoon." Thomas nodded. "I'll be there." He walked out of the office into the midday heat. The sun pressed against him like a judgment. His daughter, his blood, had tied his name to something that could end his career days before retirement, and she hadn't even warned him. Or maybe she had. Maybe the package was her warning, a way of forcing his attention. Either way, the damage was done. That evening, Brooks called again. "Captain McLean, you're going to want to come in." Inside the internal security room, the box was open. Laid out on the metal table were 3 ceramic figurines, odd minimalist forms with embedded copper wiring along the base. One of them had a sticker on the bottom. "Property of McLean Logistics, LLC." Beside them sat a folded document, a certificate of authenticity signed T. McLean. The signature was his. Almost. The curve of the T, the way the letters leaned, it was familiar but off. Forged. Beside that, a shipping manifest linking the items to a wholesaler based in Oregon. The same supplier previously red-flagged in a joint task force operation for laundering counterfeit military goods through home decor. Brooks looked at Thomas. "We ran the email. It links to a server accessed from an IP tied to an apartment complex in Atlanta, registered to Emily McLean." Thomas didn't respond. There was nothing left to say. His daughter had built a fake company using his name, sent fraudulent goods to a federal base, and forged his signature to do it. He stood still for a moment. Then he said, "Document everything. I'll provide a full statement tomorrow." Morales met him in the hallway. "We're going to need to pause your promotion review." "Understood." "It's not punishment," Morales added, "but we need to protect the chain of command." "Of course," Thomas said. He walked back to his quarters, unlocked the drawer, and stared at the photo of 11-year-old Emily holding her trophy. That child no longer existed. In her place stood a woman who had learned how to manipulate paper better than any officer he'd trained. And now it was up to him to decide what to do with the wreckage. Silence wouldn't protect him anymore. It had never protected her either. The next morning, Thomas woke before sunrise. Not because of habit, but because his thoughts hadn't let him sleep. He had spent the night going through old emails, text messages, every digital breadcrumb that Emily had left behind. There was a pattern, and once he started seeing it, he couldn't stop. 3 years ago, she asked him for a copy of his utility bill. Said she was applying for a housing grant and needed proof of a stable support figure. He sent it. A few months later, She asked for a photo of his military ID just for fun, she had joked. I want to sketch you in uniform for one of my pieces. He didn't think twice. Now he realized she had been building something. Not a tribute, a profile, an alternate version of him. And she used it to create legitimacy for a business that existed only on paper and packaging. When he arrived at the base legal office at 080, Lieutenant Sharp had already pulled additional records. We found a second business filing, she said, sliding over a document. Different name, same email, same P.O. box in Georgia. Listed you as financial guarantor. I never signed anything, he replied. We know, but the signature was close enough to fool non-forensic review. That's how these things pass, not through brilliance, through repetition and confidence. He rubbed his forehead. She knew what she was doing. Worse, Sharp replied, she counted on you not noticing. That line sat with him like a stone in his chest, because it was true. Emily knew his schedule, his routines. She knew that he didn't check civilian business filings, that he didn't monitor state registries or scan contractor applications. She had used his predictability as a shield for her deception. That afternoon, Thomas received an internal memo. Base Command had escalated the case. The Army was now coordinating with the U.S. Attorney's Office. What began as a suspicious package had officially become a federal investigation. Thomas wasn't named as a suspect. Not yet. But his name appeared on enough documents to require explanation. And in the world of military clearance, implication could be just as damaging as guilt. Morales called him into his office. Thomas, I don't need to tell you how serious this is. No, sir. They're asking for full digital access emails, personal accounts. You'll need to cooperate completely. They can have it all, Thomas said. I have nothing to hide. Morales nodded. Then fight like you mean it, not just to clear your name, to reclaim it. That night, Thomas didn't go home. He went to the data forensics unit on base, requested a trace on the IP addresses associated with the email, thomasmclain.consulting. It took 2 hours, but the tech specialist found what they were looking for. The login locations. One from a shared workspace in Asheville, North Carolina. Another from a coffee shop near a boutique Emily once promoted on Instagram. A third from a residential connection in Georgia. His hands curled into fists. This wasn't random. This wasn't accidental. She had been running this operation from her laptop using public Wi-Fi, assuming no one would trace it back. But now they had. When he returned to his quarters, he found a voicemail from his ex-wife. Thomas, I don't know what's going on, but the FBI showed up at Emily's place. They took her laptop. She's saying it's a misunderstanding. He didn't call back. He forwarded the message to Sharp. The next morning, he opened his laptop and created a digital folder labeled McClain Defense. He filled it with copies of every message from Emily that even vaguely mentioned shipping consulting or using his address. One stood out. A message from 6 months ago. Hey, Dad, hope you're well. I might send something your way. Just an inventory piece I'm storing. Totally harmless. Don't freak out. Love, M. He never responded. But that silence had now been used as passive consent. Another message from the year before, need your signature on a mock-up form just for a grant proposal look-alike. You don't even have to read it. I'll edit the final one later. He hadn't signed it, but she had sent it as a PDF. He wondered how long it had taken her to trace his pen strokes. He remembered giving her his signature once as part of a birthday card for her art class project. Practice with real letters, she had said. Now she had practiced too well. He added that to the folder. At 17:30, he met again with Sharp and Brooks. They laid out the recovered materials from the package, the figurines' wiring components, a forged shipping manifest. One item caught his eye, a business card, embossed with gold trim. Emily McClain, founder and creative director, McClain Logistics. Below it, proudly backed by veterans, built with integrity. He stared at the word integrity. It twisted in his chest like a knife. He had bled for that word, buried friends under it. sacrificed birthdays, holidays, even parts of himself to uphold what it meant. And now it had been printed cheap and hollow on a lie. He didn't speak, just stood breathing through his nose, jaw locked. Finally, he said, "We need to go federal. All the way." Sharp nodded. "We're already there." That night, alone in his room, he stared at the ceiling and thought of Emily as a child. Not the artist, not the manipulator, just the girl with the missing tooth and the spelling trophy. He wondered when she had decided he was an obstacle instead of a parent. Maybe it hadn't been a decision. Maybe it was learned piece by piece every time he corrected. Instead of encouraged, instructed, instead of embraced. Still, that didn't excuse this. This wasn't rebellion. It was betrayal. And it wasn't just against him. It was against the uniform he wore, the people he served with, and the system that had always expected him to stand for something clean. Emily had crossed a line. And now Thomas would show her what standing on the other side of it looked like. The day the official investigation was launched, everything at Fort Carson changed. Thomas could feel it in the hallways, in the way people paused when he passed, in the way conversations cut off just a second too soon. His badge still scanned. His office was still unlocked. But the air had shifted. Caution now followed him like a second shadow. At 0900, he was called to a secure conference room. Inside were two federal agents, one from the Army Criminal Investigation Division, the other from the Department of Justice. Also present were Morales, Lieutenant Sharp, and a civilian compliance officer from Washington. No introductions were made. The tone was immediate. Captain McLean, the DOJ rep, said, "You understand that your name appears on over a dozen shipping records linked to a known shell vendor under federal review." Thomas kept his voice steady. "I do, and I did not authorize any of them." The CID agent leaned forward. "Do you recognize the return address listed on the filings?" Thomas nodded. "It was once my apartment. I left it in 2018. I believe my daughter continued using the address. Have you ever registered a business number? Ever consented to act as advisor for McLean Logistics, LLC? Number. Are you aware your digital signature appears on their incorporation documents? I am now. But it is not mine. Do you know who forged it?" Thomas didn't hesitate. "Yes. My daughter." The silence that followed was heavy. The CID agent didn't flinch. "That's a serious accusation." "Not an accusation," Thomas said. "A fact. And I can provide corroborating materials, messages, emails, IP logs. I've already submitted a folder to Base Legal." The civilian officer tapped her pen against a notepad. "You're aware that being named in a federal logistics fraud case, even as an impersonated party, requires immediate administrative action within military review boards?" Thomas nodded. "Yes, ma'am." Morales shifted slightly in his seat. "Pending resolution, Captain McLean's promotion file is suspended." That part stung more than he'd expected. It wasn't the rank itself. It was what it represented, a clean end to decades of service. Now it would end with an asterisk. "We'll need you to testify when this reaches federal court," the DOJ agent said. "I will," Thomas replied. "Under oath. I want it on record. I didn't build this. I reported it." After the meeting, Thomas didn't return to his office. He sat on a bench outside the administrative wing staring at the mountains. Snow dusted their peaks like powdered armor. He remembered hiking them with Emily when she was 10. She had complained the whole time, then begged him to carry her halfway down. He did without saying a word. That memory burned now, not from nostalgia, but from grief. That child was gone, replaced by a woman who had decided her ambitions were more important than his name. Later that afternoon, Sharp called him into her office. "We found something else," she said. "A loan application submitted to a private lender, Sun Ranch Financial, listed you as primary guarantor. Claimed your earnings from consulting services through McLean Logistics totaled $80,000 last year." Thomas frowned. "That's fabricated." "We know, but it includes your social security number, your birth date, your base salary, all correct." She had access to those, he said. "I shared my tax return with her once when she said she was learning to file. It was meant to help her understand deductions, and now it's helping build a case against her." Sharp slid over a printed loan form. At the bottom was a forged W-2. It looked professional. Until you saw the email address. The same fake one. She didn't even try to cover her tracks? Thomas said, voice low. No, Sharp replied. Because she thought you wouldn't fight. That night, Thomas did something he hadn't done in years. He pulled out an old legal pad from his footlocker and started writing. Not a letter. A declaration. He listed every time Emily had used his name. Every time he had helped her out of guilt, out of duty, out of some fragile hope that being a good father meant being available no matter the cost. He wrote about the time he paid her rent, after she blew through her savings on a gallery that never opened, about the credit card he had co-signed and later paid off, about the dinner she walked out of when he refused to invest in her healing stone business. Then he wrote the line he had never said aloud, I am no longer responsible for the choices of adults who share my name. The next morning, he submitted that as a notarized statement to the base personnel office. It wouldn't change legal proceedings, but it mattered. He needed it to live somewhere official, not just in his head. 3 days later, federal agents contacted him. Emily had been served. She was being charged with wire fraud, identity theft, misuse of federal credentials, and conspiracy to commit contractor deception. Her court date was set. His presence was requested. Morales pulled him aside after the announcement. You okay? Thomas nodded. I will be. This could have ended differently, Morales said. If you'd kept quiet, if you'd tried to shield her. That was never an option, Thomas replied. Silence doesn't preserve honor. It buries it. The base held steady. People stopped whispering. A few sergeants offered quiet nods in the hallway. Lieutenant Dawson dropped off a coffee one morning and simply said, For what it's worth, we believe you. That meant more than he let on. The day of the court hearing arrived without ceremony. It wasn't a dramatic trial, just a virtual feed in a muted courtroom. But Thomas watched it every minute. Emily wore a beige sweater and a flat expression. She looked like someone auditioning for remorse. When the charges were read, she pleaded guilty. No theatrics, no breakdowns. Just a quiet yes, Your Honor. Her sentence was light: probation, fines, a 5-year ban on operating any registered business. But the record would follow her. So would the shame and the silence. His parents, Emily's grandparents, sat in the back row. They didn't look at the camera. They didn't speak his name. But they didn't dispute the facts either. When the session ended, Thomas sat at his desk and breathed. It wasn't relief. It was finality. The storm hadn't passed. It had landed. And he was still here, standing, untouched in what mattered. That afternoon, Sharp walked into his office with a single-page memo. Promotion file reinstated, she said. Command reviewed your cooperation. You're back under consideration. He took the paper, read it once, then folded it neatly. Thank you. You fought the right fight, she said, quietly, relentlessly. That's how I was trained, he replied. Turns out it works at home, too. She smiled, then left. Alone, he looked around the office. The same desk, the same chair. But the space felt cleaner, like something had been cut out. Not painfully, but precisely. He picked up the old photo of Emily and placed it into a drawer. Not to forget, but to separate the memory from the present. Then he opened a new file on his computer. It was blank, just a fresh document titled Aftermath. And in it, he began writing not about guilt, not about betrayal, but about the cost of integrity. And how sometimes the heaviest burden isn't war, it's family. In the days following the hearing, Thomas moved differently, not because he had something to prove, but because he had nothing left to explain. His name had survived the paperwork storm. His reputation remained intact, not because he shouted over the noise, but because he stood still while the storm exposed the truth. On Monday, he reported to duty as usual. Uniform pressed, boots polished, not a wrinkle out of place. Morales met him outside the command center and handed him a file without a word. Inside was a preliminary briefing on an upcoming logistics overhaul. Thomas read it line by line, annotated clearly, and returned it the same afternoon. Nothing in his tone suggested he had been dragged through a federal investigation. Nothing in his manner asked for sympathy. But everyone felt the shift. Respect, once silent, became visible. Soldiers who once avoided eye contact now nodded with intention. Junior officers lingered longer in meetings. Even Base Legal sent him a thank you memo acknowledging his contribution to protecting operational integrity. But Thomas didn't smile. Not outwardly. He had spent a lifetime building a foundation out of duty, and when it cracked, he didn't scream. He reinforced it. In silence. That silence wasn't empty. It was a boundary. It said, I'm not your scapegoat. I'm not your fallback, and I won't carry what's not mine. That clarity came into full focus when Emily called. Unknown number. The ringtone buzzed against the desk like an alarm. He let it ring twice before answering. Thomas McLean, he said professionally. Dad, her voice cracked. I know you saw everything. He didn't reply. I didn't mean for it to go this far, she continued. It was just supposed to help me get started. Just a foundation. You forged my name, he said flatly. On federal documents. I thought I could control it. I didn't think they'd trace it back to you. That's the problem, Emily. You never think it through. You just assume someone else will fix it. I said I'm sorry, and what does that change? Silence. Then, they've pulled my accounts. I can't apply for anything. No grants, no contracts. I'm locked out. That's not a consequence, he said. That's justice. You're my father, she snapped. You were supposed to protect me. No, he said, firm now. I was supposed to raise you, teach you right from wrong, and I did. You made your choices after that, her voice dropped. You're still angry. No, he replied. I'm done. He ended the call, no rage, no slamming, just a quiet click that closed a chapter. That evening, he updated his emergency contacts in the military system, removed Emily's name, removed his ex-wife, added a fellow officer who had once pulled him out of a dangerous flood zone in Afghanistan, someone who knew what it meant to show up when it mattered. Then he printed the confirmation page and filed it into his personal folder labeled Legacy. Not to forget, but to document where the line had been drawn. A week later, Command scheduled his final review. Retirement was back on track. He prepared the required files, submitted his last reports, and cleared his quarters. Before turning in his badge, he visited the logistics bay one last time, walked past the rows of containers, the supply chain map on the wall, the inventory spreadsheets with his handwriting across them. He had kept this system running for years, and despite everything, he would leave it better than he found it. That night, he found a shoebox in the back of his closet. Inside were mementos cards, old notes, 2 crayon drawings from Emily's kindergarten years. He stared at one in particular. A sketch of them both holding hands beneath a lopsided sun. Daddy's my hero, it said in shaky lettering. He held it for a minute, then fed it into the fireplace, not with spite, with closure. The flame took it gently. As it burned, he whispered not a farewell, but a truth. Heroes don't lie, and they don't carry lies for others. The next morning, he received an email. Subject line, final notice, reintegration status. The body read, Captain Thomas McLean has completed all requirements for promotion consideration. Clearance reinstated. Status active, full eligibility. There was no congratulations, no applause, just a line of text that meant everything. Because he hadn't demanded it. He had earned it. Not by defending a name, by living up to it. That afternoon, Morales found him near the motor pool. Your file's been cleared. You're back in the system. Full honors. Thomas nodded. Thank you. Morales hesitated. I meant what I said. You could have gone quiet, let this slide. But you didn't. Silence doesn't fix corruption, Thomas replied. It feeds it. Morales gave him a rare smile. Retirement parties next week. We're doing something low-key. But you'll speak. I'll write something Thomas said. Keep it short and honest. As Morales walked away, Thomas looked at the horizon. It wasn't poetic, it wasn't symbolic, it was just sky, wide, clear, and waiting. He wasn't bitter. He wasn't even tired anymore. He was focused, still, grounded in the knowledge that nothing had broken him. Not because he fought back with fury, but because he didn't run. And that stillness, that refusal to be moved by deception, was the loudest strength he'd ever known. The ceremony was held on a cloudless afternoon behind the operations building under the same Colorado sun that had greeted Thomas for the last 2 decades. It wasn't grand, just chairs arranged neatly on the gravel, a podium, and a banner that read "Honor Through Service." He arrived early. Not out of obligation, but because he needed a moment alone. The chairs were still empty when he walked the perimeter. He looked at the flag fluttering near the base wall, the sound of it slicing through the air, like memory. He touched the edge of his uniform, adjusted the pin on his left chest pocket, and breathed deeply. No weight, no doubt. Just stillness. Morales opened the event with a brief speech recounting Thomas's decades of service, his overseas deployments, his logistics innovations, the recruits he'd mentored. He never asked for recognition, Morales said. He asked for clarity, for accountability. And when he was tested not by war but by deception, he held the line. Not with noise, but with truth. Applause broke across the crowd. Thomas stepped forward. No notes. Just a small folded piece of paper he didn't read from. He looked out at the faces, young soldiers graying Pierre's base staff. Some he had fought beside, others he had trained. Many knew the story, few knew the details. "I didn't come here to talk about what happened," he began. "You've all seen the reports, you've heard the words fraud, identity theft, misconduct. But that's not what today is about. Today is about what remains when everything else is stripped away, when trust is broken, when your own name becomes a question mark." He paused. "What remains is what you choose to keep. I chose my integrity." The crowd was quiet, not out of politeness, but respect. "Some people spend their lives trying to prove themselves to the wrong audience," Thomas said. "I almost did. But then I remembered I don't serve for applause. I serve for the mission, for the code, for the people beside me." Another pause. "And for myself. Because that's who carries your name when the silence comes." He ended it there. No grand finale, no rehearsed punchline. Just truth. Raw and steady. The kind of truth that didn't ask for validation. When the ceremony ended, a few approached him. Lieutenant Dawson, Sergeant Vega, even Brooks from Internal Security. Each offered quiet praise, not for the speech, but for the stillness he'd maintained while everything tried to knock him off balance. Morales pulled him aside. "The memo's been signed, full retirement. No asterisk. Your file is clean." Thomas nodded. "I didn't expect a medal." "You didn't need one," Morales said. "Your record speaks louder." That night, back in his quarters, Thomas packed the last of his things. The room was bare now, walls stripped, drawers emptied. Only the essentials remained. Before locking up, he placed one final document on the desk, a printed copy of his formal statement to the Army Legal Affairs Office. It read, "In the face of deception, I chose truth. In the shadow of betrayal, I chose integrity. I leave this service not wounded, not broken, but whole." The next morning, he turned in his badge, saluted one final time, and stepped off the base grounds. No music played, no farewell parade, just the soft sound of gravel under boots. And that was enough. 2 weeks later, he received a letter from the Department of the Army. Inside was a single sentence: "Captain Thomas McLean is hereby commended for his cooperation, fortitude, an unwavering commitment to the ethical standards of the United States Armed Forces." That was it. No plaque, no bonus, just words. But those words mattered more than any headline, because they were true. Around the same time, he received an email from Emily. Subject: "Dad, please." The body was short. "I know I can't undo what I did, but I'm scared. I don't know how to fix any of this. I don't know who I am anymore." He didn't reply. Not out of cruelty, out of conviction. Sometimes the hardest boundary is the one you draw with someone you love. And sometimes protecting your name means letting go of the people who keep trying to steal it. That weekend, he visited the county courthouse and filed an official disassociation affidavit. It wasn't a lawsuit, just a document that clarified he had no current or future affiliation with any business, financial, or personal endeavor tied to Emily McLean. He paid the filing fee, walked out into the sunlight, and didn't look back. In the weeks that followed, he began to live quietly, not in exile, in peace. He fixed the back porch of his home, took long walks, cooked dinner without rushing. For the first time in years, his phone didn't vibrate with demands or guilt or emergencies, just reminders to breathe, to stretch, to read. One morning he stood in the kitchen holding a mug of black coffee. The sunlight poured in like it used to through the office blinds on base. He looked at the counter. The same spot where the package had once sat. A bomb in cardboard. He remembered what Morales had said that day. Don't open it. And he hadn't. That decision had saved more than his career. It had saved his dignity, his truth, his silence. Because sometimes refusing to open the box is the loudest act of defiance you can make. And sometimes that refusal is the first breath of freedom. Months passed. The world didn't stop for his vindication. It never does. Vindication isn't a parade. It's not music swelling in the background. It's the quiet sound of your own name no longer echoing with suspicion. It's walking into a grocery store without calculating who might be watching. It's checking the mail and seeing only your mail, not someone else's debt, pretending to be yours. Thomas adjusted easily to retirement. Mornings were his again. He read the paper at the kitchen table, brewed coffee exactly how he liked it, and watered the garden he'd once ignored. He didn't rush. He didn't explain. He just lived. He changed his email, changed his number, scrubbed old documents. Not because he feared further fraud, but because he needed a clean house to match his clean name. Sometimes ghosts don't leave unless you unlock the door and show them the way out. One afternoon, he found a file in an old USB stick labeled Photos. Inside were pictures he hadn't seen in years. Emily at 6 birthday hats, tilted frosting on her nose. One of them at a lake, her hand clutching his with fierce pride. He stared at it longer than he meant to. Then quietly, he deleted it. Not out of hate, but to make space. That night he sat on the porch with a cup of mint tea and listened to the cicadas. Noticed the breeze. Noticed the absence of noise. Not silence, just quiet. Chosen. Earned. It had taken losing what he thought he had, a daughter's trust, the illusion of familial loyalty, to realize what he truly held, a life unshaken by lies. He didn't share his story online. He didn't write a memoir. He didn't tweet a thread. But in a drawer by his bed, he kept a single folder. Inside it were printouts of court records, forged documents, emails, screenshots, and at the very top a copy of the Army's final statement. Captain Thomas McLean acted with honor, resilience, and full cooperation under review. His name is cleared without condition. That sentence mattered more than forgiveness, because forgiveness, while noble, had never been asked for. What he wanted, what he needed, was truth that held its shape under pressure. He walked every day, sometimes alone, sometimes with old friends who asked about the trial only once, then never again. That was enough. The base sent him a formal invitation to the annual ethics training, not to attend, to speak. He declined politely, then added a note. Ethics, he wrote, is not what you recite when people are listening. It's what you enforce when no one else is. They printed that on a flyer. A small tribute. He never framed it, just nodded when a former CO mentioned it during a lunch meeting months later. In late autumn, he got a letter. Handwritten. No return address, but the handwriting was familiar. It was short. I understand now. You weren't trying to punish me. You were showing me how not to drown. I still don't know how to swim, but I'm trying. I hope that counts for something. No name, no apology, just those words. He folded it carefully, placed it in the fireplace, let it burn, not to erase, to release. Because letting go isn't the same as forgetting. It's knowing you could pick it up again, but you don't. And that's strength. A year after his retirement, he received his final benefits letter. Full pension, no flags, all ranks recognized. On the last page, a box was checked eligible for Veterans Advisory Board invitation. He smiled, not because it mattered, but because it was clean. In the quiet of his home with no one watching, he leaned back in his chair and looked out the window. The wind moved the trees slowly, the same way truth moves through the world, quiet, steady, undeniable. Then he spoke not loudly, just aloud. They tried to make me the box, the container, the label, but I refused. I stayed myself. That was his victory, not court records, not reinstated honors, but the fact that when the test came not on a battlefield but in his own bloodline, he didn't flinch, he didn't bend, he didn't pick up the lie and pretend it was love. He left the lie where it belonged, outside his door, still sealed, still humming, still desperate to be opened. And he walked past it, into a life that was truly his, and that more than anything was peace.